Close your eyes and picture the world centuries ago tonight will bring those distant moments back to life, offering a soothing retreat from today's bustle. The steppe wind whispers low across an endless plain. You're standing somewhere in what is now Mongolia. No landmarks, no fences, just land and sky in constant quiet motion. A light dusting of snow covers the grass like powdered flour, and you can hear the faint jingle of a horse's harness in the distance. The air smells of wool ash and animals, and near a crude yurt half hidden by smoke, a boy crouches low watching the horizon. His name is Subutai, and though his hands are small and blistered, his eyes are already measuring the earth like a general. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not entirely sure what draws your attention to him first. Maybe it's the way he moves without making sound, or how his gaze locks onto a hawk, circling miles away as if it were just another passing thought. Subutai is not a loud child. He doesn't speak unless prompted, and even then his answers are short-clipped, almost apologetic. But when you watch him from the side of the yurt, you can tell he's always thinking, always scanning. He's born into a clan not especially famous or feared. The Uriankai aren't nobility. In fact, they're blacksmiths by trade. It's an odd background for someone who would one day command more territory than Napoleon and outmaneuver kings, sultans, and emperors alike. But in this moment, none of that exists yet. Right now, he's just a boy with a chipped bow watching the wind. Your hands are numb as you help him string a rabbit snare. His brother Yelme chuckles at your clumsy fingers and flicks snow into your hair. The brothers are closer than you'd expect from two boys already trained to kill. They finish each other's chores, share meat without asking, and when they spar, they never aim to win. Just to understand. At night, the yurt is dim and heavy with goat fat smoke. You lie on a fur near the boys, listening to their father's slow breathing. No stories are told, just chewing the fire's soft crackle and the occasional howl of wolves outside the felt walls. Subutai sleeps with his hand near his belt knife. Not out of fear, just instinct. By the time he's old enough to ride long distances, you've already followed him through 6 mock battles with neighboring boys. He doesn't win by strength. He wins because he shows up somewhere no one expected. Because he listens to the hooves. Because he waits for mistakes. There's a day you remember clearly, the first time he takes you up the ridge near his camp, where the hills roll like gentle ocean waves. He squints down at a stream, then draws a crude map in the dirt. Not for fun, not to show off, just to remember. And then he erases it. He learns to count herds not by eyes, but by droppings. He can estimate the age of a rider by the angle of their stirrup imprints. He teaches you that clouds move differently over valleys that hide water. You never thought clouds could be useful until Subutai showed you how to read them like smoke signals from the sky. Still, for all his sharpness, there's something heavy about him. He doesn't laugh easily. He doesn't speak of the future. Once during a hunt, he pauses over a bird he's downed with an impossibly distant arrow. Instead of celebrating, he just stares. Too easy, he mutters, then tosses it to the dogs. One freezing morning, Yelme confesses that he wants to serve a Khan. Not just any Khan, a real one. Not a tribal elder, but someone who can unite them all. Subutai says nothing. He just stares into the fire. But the next day, you all begin packing. You think maybe they're leaving to visit cousins or trade horses. But when you see where the trail leads west, not north, you realize something else. They're heading toward Temujin, the man who would become Genghis Khan. No gifts are carried, just weapons and resolve. By the time you reach Temujin's camp, there's a buzz in the air, the kind you feel before lightning strikes. Mongol scouts stand beside lean horses, their saddles caked in blood and dust. Everyone moves quickly even when standing still. Subutai kneels low before the Khan's tent and does something unexpected. He offers his service not as a commander or even a warrior, but as a scout. A whisper in the wind. A ghost with a bow. Historians still argue whether Subutai joined Temujin as a slave, a servant, or a volunteer. Some say he was captured. Others believe he was quietly accepted. But you remember the way the guards looked at him, like they already sensed something different behind those flat, unreadable eyes. In the following weeks, you run messages across frozen rivers and through enemy camps. You deliver coded signs by tying knots in horsehair, and you always ride with Subutai slightly ahead of you, never behind. There's a story you hear during a night march. A rival warlord once laughed at Subutai's suggestion to flank a force by crossing a canyon trail covered in ice. "You'll lose half your men," the warlord scoffed. Subutai replied with a shrug. "Only half." No one laughed after that. And yet for all his brilliance, he never seeks titles or praise. His tent is smaller than most officers. His meals simpler. He sharpens his own blades and mends his own boots. He doesn't lead by shouting, he leads by knowing. You lie awake one night listening to the quiet murmur of Subutai outlining a plan to Gelmay, using just stick scratches and broken phrases. A plan that weeks later leads to the capture of an entire enemy caravan without a single Mongol casualty. Even then, Subutai just nods when others cheer. Then he climbs a hill alone to watch the moon, and you still uncertain how or why follow. The wind sharpens as winter deepens, and you're reminded each morning that the steppe doesn't coddle anyone. You wake with ice in your nose, hairs, fingers stiff and curled like forgotten tools. Still, you trudge beside Subutai and Gelmi, your borrowed boots crunching frost with every step. Life here is boiled down to bone and breath, eat, ride, survive, repeat. By now you've become a half-decent archer, at least when your fingers aren't too numb to hold the bowstring. But Subutai fires without pause, galloping at full speed, his body twisting like a reed in wind. He doesn't aim, he just knows. You've watched him clip a rabbit in mid-leap from horseback. You've also watched him shoot into tall grass, pause, then ride ahead to collect the fallen pheasant. No applause, no smirk. Just a quiet nod to himself, as if checking off a box in his mind. His brother Gelmay, on the other hand, is fire to Subutai's ice. He's louder, quicker to smile, and more prone to throwing a punch, just to see if one comes back. Together, the two of them are like a song balanced, practiced, dangerous. Meals are simple meat when you're lucky, fermented milk when you're not, and dried curds that taste suspiciously like saddle leather. There's a shared pot always bubbling with something unidentifiable, and no one dares ask what floated in last. One afternoon, you help the brothers dig up a root for boiling, only to be told later it's used more often to tan leather than feed humans. You chew anyway because, frankly, it's warm, and food is food. As teens, Subutai and Gelma begin tagging along with seasoned warriors during raids, not as soldiers yet, but as shadow apprentices. They listen, mimic, observe. You ride behind, always watching how Subutai catalogs every detail, how enemy tents are pitched, which horses eat fastest, where water is stored. He remembers it all even weeks later, as if he has maps tucked behind his eyelids. During one raid on a rival clan, Subutai suggests circling the camp 3 times from different angles to trick the sentries into thinking a much larger force is approaching. It works. The enemy flees in confusion, leaving behind everything including 3 camels and a goat tied to a cooking pot. The warriors laugh and slap Subutai on the back. He just mutters, "They always watch the direction of dust." That night, as they roast stolen meat, Subutai disappears briefly. You find him seated by the river, silently polishing arrowheads. You can learn from every mistake he says, especially the ones that weren't yours. You blink unsure if that's advice or a warning. Over the next year, you notice his plans grow more intricate. When others think only of the next skirmish, Subutai is already imagining what the enemy will do 3 weeks from now, where they'll flee, what bridges they'll cross, what bait might slow them. He even builds small models in the dirt valleys and riverbanks, sketched with sticks and stones. One night, while others sleep, you watch him place pieces of dried meat to mark enemy positions. It's eerily effective, and somehow a little funny. Don't eat the reinforcements, he deadpans when Yelmi tries to swipe a flank of beef from the map. Subutai learns to read the weather with disturbing accuracy. Before anyone else, he can tell when snow is coming not by clouds, but by how the wind moves across hills. He claims birds go silent moments before a storm. You think he's joking until one morning he sits up straight, points east, and announces you have 2 hours to pack. By nightfall, a whiteout hits. Historians still argue whether Subutai's environmental awareness came from shamanic training, sheer observation, or an almost supernatural instinct. There are tales of him knowing a river was fording too fast just by hearing the echo of hooves return differently. It sounds like a stretch until you witness it. By the time he's old enough to join real campaigns, Subutai has already mapped vast territories in his mind. He even knows which grasslands recover fastest after grazing. Not for the sake of nature, but because horses are more important than men in a Mongol army. If the horses fall, the empire does too. Subutai treats horses better than most people. He speaks softly to them, never raises a whip, and massages their joints after long rides. Once, when one of his mares goes lame, he doesn't replace her. He walks alongside instead. "She got me here," he murmurs, brushing frost from her mane. "I'll get her home. I'll get her." You notice his reputation spreading. Other warriors begin asking his advice. Not directly, no one likes to seem uncertain, but they linger near his fire, casually mentioning terrain, asking idle questions about roads and streams. Subutai answers without pretense, but you can tell he knows they're listening more carefully than they admit. During one brutal winter campaign, the warriors begin falling ill from drinking tainted water. Subutai had boiled his in advance, quietly, without fanfare. When others collapse with fever, he shares his clean supply, but only with those who've shared maps with him in the past. Loyalty is its own currency, he tells you. A few years pass. Yelme grows broader, more reckless in battle, more beloved. Subutai grows quieter, not shy, just focused. His eyes are always far away, as if already calculating the next 20 moves on a chessboard that hasn't been set yet. During a skirmish gone sideways, you watch him take command after the ranking officer is knocked unconscious. Without hesitation, Subutai redirects half the men through a narrow ravine times a false retreat with eerie precision and uses smoke from burning brush to mask the approach of archers. The enemy crumbles within minutes. Later, when praised, he shrugs. "They wanted a trap. I gave them one." That's the moment Genghis Khan starts paying attention. Really paying attention. One morning, the great Khan summons Subutai not for punishment or orders, but for questions. He wants to know how a young man from a smith's clan can see terrain like a hawk and command warriors like a seasoned general. Subutai has no grand tale. He just says, "I remember where things are." Genghis doesn't laugh. He nods. From that day forward, you realize Subutai's path is no longer ordinary. He will ride with the elite. He will lead entire wings of the Mongol horde. He will become the mind behind its most legendary campaigns. But tonight, in the cold hush of the camp, he's just a boy again, sitting near the fire, rubbing ice from his boots and staring into the dark with that familiar look. The one that means he already knows what comes next. You're awake before the sun, the chill in the air sharp enough to bite through your thickest furs. But Subutai is already gone. You spot him near the eastern ridge, standing motionless with his arms folded and a silent horse at his back. He's staring at the rising smoke of a distant camp, Temujin's camp. The brothers don't speak as you pack. You don't ask questions either. This is a moment, not just a visit or a job. This is the fork in the road where youth ends and history begins. As you ride into the camp of Temujin, it feels less like entering a military camp and more like stepping into the pulse of a storm. Warriors sharpen blades without speaking. Children chase goats between wagons. And everyone, absolutely everyone, looks busy. You're waved through without fanfare. Subutai isn't wearing anything fancy, just the same weather-worn coat and a patch sewn over the shoulder, but somehow he looks more official than half the commanders. Maybe it's the way he holds himself, like every step is already part of a map in his head. Temujin's tent is simple but enormous hide, stretched tight over a frame of bones and wood smoke, curling from the top like a lazy dragon. You're told to wait outside, but Subutai is ushered in. No announcements, no ceremony. Just a flick of the guard's chin and a parting flap of felt. He's inside for hours. Jelmy eventually grows bored and starts balancing a dagger on the back of his hand. You start counting horsetails. But Subutai, when he emerges, there's something different about his gait. Not pride, not fear, just certainty. He mounts up and says, "We ride south tomorrow." That's it. You don't find out until later what was said in that tent. How Subutai offered himself not as a general, but as a scout. How he promised no glory, only information. How he admitted that while others knew how to fight, he knew how to win. Temujin, still just forging the pieces of what would become the Mongol Empire, must have seen something rare. He assigned Subutai not to a regiment, but to his inner circle, trusted him to scout enemy roads, gave him maps no one else had seen. And here's the strangest part. Subutai wasn't even from a noble lineage. In a world that worshipped bloodlines, he came from a blacksmith family. He had no inherited titles, no battle-hardened ancestors. Just wits and patience. A born strategist hiding in plain sight. That night around the fire, Yelma teases his brother. "So what are you now, Khan of Creek Crossings?" Subutai smirks and replies, "Only if the enemy is dumb enough to ford them." You all laugh, but something deeper settles in your chest. This man, this calm, quiet observer, is going to become something terrifying. Your first mission under Temujin's banner is humbling. You're not galloping across open fields or drawing swords with a scream. Instead, you're assigned to measure river depths. Literally. You tie stones to strings and wade into icy water, while Subutai jots numbers into dirt. You feel like a glorified fisherman, but then you see why it matters. A few weeks later, that same river becomes the death trap for an enemy cavalry that expected shallow crossings. Subutai remembered the depth difference near the bend, and that bend became a grave. He begins using birds to test distances. Not trained ones, just common ravens. He releases them from high ridges and watches how long they take to land in visible valleys. It's crude, but weirdly effective. Historians still argue whether this trick was original or borrowed from Chinese military texts. Some say it was sheer improvisation. Others insist Subutai had access to ancient strategies lost to time. Either way, no one else does it. and no one else seems to care. You do, though. You're there when he draws the first complete route around an enemy camp using only wind direction, animal scat, and campfire smoke. You're there when he explains that an army can be tracked not by its prints, but by how the grass leans. You're also there when he announces that you need to ride 70 miles southeast because the birds flew that way more slowly yesterday. It sounds insane, but it works. He quickly develops a reputation among Temujin's commanders. They call him the Ferret. Not because he's small or sly, but because he goes anywhere, sniffs out everything, and leaves chaos behind. One commander suspicious of Subutai's advice ignores it and leads his men into what he believes is an unguarded pass. You later help recover the corpses from that pass. Subutai says nothing, doesn't even blink, just notes in the dirt that false gaps encourage real deaths. Subutai becomes obsessed with timing. Not speed, mind you. Timing. The idea that arriving 5 minutes too early is worse than arriving an hour late. He drills you and the other scouts relentlessly. A charge begun too soon dies in the wind, he mutters. One begun too late dies in the mud. You learn to eat on horseback sleep in short bursts and take off your saddle every few hours, not for comfort, but to check your horse's back for swelling. A lame horse delays 100 men, Subutai says. You're not sure where he gets these sayings, but he drops them like pebbles behind him, as if you're supposed to collect them later. One frigid evening, you cross a frozen river under moonlight. The ice groans beneath the hooves, and your heart skips with every crack. But Subutai has already tested it using a bundle of sticks and his own body weight earlier that afternoon. It holds. You reach a ridge overlooking a valley dotted with campfires. The enemy dozens of tense guards mounted patrols. Subutai watches silent. Then he says, "They don't know their rear path is a marsh." You squint, you see no marsh, just pale flat land. But he's right. 2 days later, when Temujin orders the attack, the enemy flees through their rear, straight into a bog. You watch from a hillside as cavalry flounder, horses sink, and chaos reigns. Temujin is impressed. He begins consulting Subutai more frequently, even when senior officers grumble. He sees paths where others see dust, the Khan says, and that is worth more than swords. At one celebratory feast, a bard sings of heroic Mongol warriors and their mighty steeds. Subutai leaves halfway through. Later, you find him sketching ridges in the dirt beside his tent. Glory is for poets, he says. Give me predictable terrain and a quiet night. That becomes his mantra. And yours. It starts with a goat and ends with a lesson in survival, like most of Subutai's early campaigns. You're sitting cross-legged on a fur mat, gnawing at what you hope is just overcooked mutton, when he drops a chunk of dried sinew onto your lap. Boil that, he says, as if it's common knowledge. We'll need broth. Bones keep us marching. And just like that, you learn the first rule of Mongol logistics: everything is fuel. Subutai has no patience for supply lines. He sees them as chains, not lifelines. An army that eats from wagons dies in mud, he mutters, almost like a prayer. Instead, he drills his men to live off the land, scavenging drying meat, making sour cheese that smells like a dead yak's armpit, but keeps forever. You help butcher a horse, once don't ask whose it was. The meat's fine. The marrow is better. But it's the liver Subutai insists on eating raw, standing barefoot in snow. Warm blood keeps the mind sharp, he says, chewing like it's bread. You do not try it, you're not that brave. When your force rides into the outer edges of the Jin dynasty's territories, it's not with banners waving and horns blowing. It's a whisper of hooves, the rustle of brush, and the stink of boiled leather. You pass peasants who don't even notice your presence. Because the genius of Subutai is not just in where he goes, but how silently he gets there. He studies roads others ignore. When the Jin armies expect an approach from the west, you're already circling from the east. He fords rivers no sane man would cross, marches across swamps at night, and somehow always arrives exactly when it's most inconvenient for the enemy. One morning, you wake up to find yourself staring at a cliff face sheer and impossible. Subutai looks at it, chews some jerky, then turns to you with a smirk. They won't expect us from here. He's right. The detour takes 2 days and one broken ankle, not yours, but when you descend into the rear of the enemy camp, it's like watching ants scatter when a rock falls into their hill. Later, a captured Jin officer admits they had assumed no one could move an army across that pass. Subutai just says good. The deeper you move into Jin territory, the more he starts obsessing over granaries. Not palaces, not barracks, granaries. He hits them like clockwork. His logic: if you take the rice, you starve the soldiers. If you starve the soldiers, they fight like wet birds. You've seen him plan attacks around market days when towns are most full and least guarded. You've also seen him fake attacks on one village, only to force a migration that clogs the roads needed by an enemy regiment nearby. He's fighting with food, not fire. Historians still debate whether Subutai invented what we now call strategic starvation or merely perfected it. Either way, you've ridden past more burned wheat fields than castles, and you know the smell of singed rice all too well. But for every village taken, Subutai insists on order. No random looting, no pointless cruelty. He'll flog soldiers for disobeying, even kill a commander who ignores his plan. Control wins campaigns, he mutters after one such execution. Emotion only wins songs. You think of this one afternoon as you help bury stolen cabbage under hay. Why? Because fermenting it will feed the horses longer. Subutai thought of that too. The Jin generals accustomed to large, cumbersome armies can't keep up. They respond slowly, and Subutai dances around them like smoke in wind. He never gives them the battle they expect. One commander even pens a desperate plea to the emperor: "We cannot trap the wind, nor the man who rides it." That man, your friend, is now orchestrating entire war fronts. One campaign sticks with you more than others. It involves a crumbling mountain village built across a narrow ravine. You expect a siege. Subutai instead dams a nearby stream and diverts the water down into the valley. Not to flood it, no, that would be dramatic. He's subtler than that. He lets it soak in, just enough to turn the soil soft and unsteady. When the defenders charge out to fight, the ground crumbles beneath their own weight. Horses slide, men fall, and arrows rain like sleet. It's over in minutes. Subutai calls it passive terrain manipulation. You call it spooky. Later, you watch him carve a piece of dried apple into a mini ravine to explain the plan again for fun. Then he eats the apple. At one point, you find yourself lugging packs of millet up a ridge, panting like a tired ox. Why not use the mules, you ask sourly. Subutai just points out that mules make noise. You do not bring it up again. And then there's the meat cache incident. Subutai has riders hide strips of dried meat in trees along the campaign route. Days later, when your food supplies mysteriously vanish during a feigned retreat, you eat from those caches. Meanwhile, the enemy hoping to starve you finds themselves starving instead. You swear he enjoys being underestimated. At one war council, when a rival commander scoffs at one of his suggestions, Subutai shrugs and says, "Try it your way, then follow me when it fails." It fails, dramatically. Later that night, the same commander offers Subutai fermented milk as a peace gesture. Subutai drinks it, thanks him, and casually points out where his camp placement would have led to his own encirclement. Then he goes back to carving a chessboard into the earth with his dagger. No one interrupts again. Subutai develops strange rituals. He likes to smell the air before deciding where to pitch camp. He plucks grass and throws it to test wind, not for weather, but for sound travel. He once sends you 10 miles out of your way to check whether a specific hill echoes differently than the one before. It does, he smiles. Historians still argue whether Subutai was slightly superstitious or simply tuned into details that others missed. The answer is probably yes. The logistics get stranger still. He begins organizing horse rotations, not between men, but between distances. He assigns different horses to specific terrain types: marsh slope, dry, flat, rocky incline. It's like someone organizing socks, but deadlier. When asked why, he replies, tired horses lose messages. Messages lose wars. That night, you dream of falling into a bottomless saddlebag. And through it all, he never stops learning. Every time a plan works, he notes what worked better. Every time it doesn't, he doesn't scold, he adjusts. He doesn't chase perfection, he chases efficiency. You're not sure when it happens, but sometime during the campaign into Jin lands, you stop thinking of him as Subutai the scout. He's no longer that. He's the architect of movement, the whisper behind the whirlwind. The reason an army of thousands can cross frozen rivers, eat air, and win. And all he wants is a quiet place to draw new maps. You're deep in the folds of China now, no more sweeping grasslands or whispering steppes, but a dense, misty maze of rice paddies, bamboo groves, and serpentine rivers. The Jin dynasty's territory seems infinite, crisscrossed with crumbling walls and watchtowers that poke from the landscape like stubborn old teeth. Subutai doesn't flinch. Where others see confusion, he sees opportunity. You're here now, slipping through valleys no map mentions, guided not by landmarks but by feel, by soil dampness, bird noise, and how long it takes your horse to sink ankle deep into mud. The Jin army is different. They don't scatter like tribes, they entrench. They don't chase, they wait. Their generals are veterans trained in defense with thick-walled cities and cruel patience. They expect you to smash against them like a wave. Subutai refuses to oblige. He studies their forts, then walks away. Not out of fear, but calculation. Why climb the wall, he mutters one night, when the wall can follow you down the hill. You're not sure what that means at the time, but a week later you see it happen. There's a town at a river bend, small, fortified, nothing remarkable. Subutai orders a false retreat, lets a Jin garrison chase your vanguard over a shaky wooden bridge. Then, just as the enemy pursues in full gallop, crack. You've never seen anything so casually precise. He timed the bridge's sabotage to the exact weight of their crossing. It collapses not under the first men, but the middle column. Horses plunge into the river below. Screams rise like startled crows. Those who make it across are met by a flanking force that seems to appear from the fog. Subutai had hidden them in the tree line hours earlier. Later, he explains over a cup of sour milk. Most men try to avoid water. That's a mistake. Water hides footsteps. You consider that as you sip something that tastes vaguely of hoof. That's not the only surprise in store. Subutai begins to dismantle Jin command structures, not through battle but confusion. He sends units ahead to intercept messages. When those can't be captured, he has decoys, written false letters full of disinformation, misdated orders, and completely fictional troop locations. You help deliver one once disguised as a deserter. You're terrified. You stutter, forget your alias halfway through, and drop the scroll. They still believe it. A week later, the Jin moved 2 entire battalions to defend a mountain pass. That never gets attacked. Meanwhile, Subutai takes the real target, an armory near the coast, without so much as an arrow fired. Historians still argue whether Subutai pioneered strategic forgery or just elevated it. There are no originals left of his scrolls, only whispers. But the results, those are very real. As the campaign drags on, the Mongols grow leaner, meaner, sharper. Subutai changes their rhythm. He rotates scouts on 8-hour loops, builds fire chains for instant messaging across valleys, and starts using drums not for morale, but misdirection. You bang a war drum once in a ravine. The echo travels so oddly that the enemy believes a full army approaches. They light fires. You watch from above, amused, eating hard cheese that's older than most of the horses. There's one moment that defines the campaign. You're encamped near a broken village. The Jin have fortified a nearby city with double walls, towers, and enough archers to blot out the sun. Everyone wants to go around. Subutai says no. He doesn't plan a siege, he plans a performance. Over a week, you help construct fake siege equipment from logs and cloth. Ballista that don't fire. Ladders too short. Trebuchets filled with sandbags instead of stones. At night, you light double the normal number of fires, circle the walls, blow horns. It's exhausting theater. Then 2 nights before the assault, Subutai disappears. You think he's sulking, but no, he's riding, fast, with a hand-picked force. While the enemy watches your circus, Subutai crosses a side river by building a floating causeway out of reeds and stolen barrels. He flanks the city, not to attack, oh no, to set fire to the granaries behind it. By morning, the city surrenders, without a siege, without blood. They built the walls to keep us out, he says. I built a fire to keep them in. You don't know whether to laugh or applaud. Not everything is smooth, of course. There's the infamous goat incident. You're marching through a region known for hidden Jin ambushes. Subutai halts the army because he sees something odd, half-eaten grass. Nothing else. Just grass grazed unevenly. He declares there are enemy troops nearby disguised in the hills. You scoff. He slaps you with a goat bladder. 3 hours later, you stumble across a hidden camp of scouts. Subutai captures them without a fight. You apologize. He nods and says even goats know not to graze near men. That night, you help him roast the bladder for soup. It's chewy. He starts assigning animal-based code phrases. Goat is grazing means the enemy is near but unaware. Donkey dust means fake trails have been spotted. And dead pig refers to a path that looks safe but definitely isn't. You eventually create a whole bestiary of battlefield slang. It's absurd and somehow brilliant. One afternoon, he lectures you on supply routes while fashioning tiny clay soldiers from river mud. Every general is a fool without flour, he tells you, placing a glob of sticky dough at the center of his model formation. Then he eats it. You learn to nod and never ask questions. Historians love to quote Subutai's later campaigns, the grand ones with huge death tolls and shifting empires. But here in the quiet fog of the early Chinese campaigns, you see something different. You see the raw machinery of his mind. He's not just a warrior, he's a sculptor of chaos, a composer of confusion. His victories don't come from overwhelming force. They come from being in the right place at the wrong time for someone else. And the worst part, you're starting to think he enjoys it. You're ankle-deep in muck pretending to be a fleeing idiot and trying not to laugh as a Jin officer yells, "After them from a city gate that's about to become a trap." Subutai's favorite tactic. The feigned retreat is a masterstroke of acting. And you've been drafted into the company of clowns. Not actual clowns, just tired, filthy Mongol horsemen, galloping like headless chickens, flinging their arms around and dropping fake supply bundles for dramatic flair. The Jin soldiers take the bait predictably. You hear their hooves behind you getting closer. The panic is real, but not yours. You're counting paces, waiting for the right moment. Subutai, several ridges away, watches it all through a spyglass, borrowed from a song merchant. He mutters to no one in particular. Now, and as if on cue, you and the others veer sharply. The pursuers, overconfident and spread out, follow right into the choke point, a narrow bridge across a rocky ravine. The bridge was built fast, too fast. Subutai had it reinforced in just the right places to look sturdy while being, well, not. As the weight of the charging Jin force crests its midpoint, it happens. The bridge collapses not spectacularly, just suddenly. Wood snaps, men scream, horses flail and tumble into the riverbed. Arrows whistle from concealed flanks. Those who made it across find themselves boxed in by Subutai's riders emerging from a thicket. It's like watching a magician flick his wrist and reveal that the coin was never behind your ear. It was under your saddle the whole time. You circle back just in time to see the final part of the plan unfold. The terrified survivors being ushered into a broken city gate, while Subutai calmly paces the perimeter, inspecting the result like a tailor checking the seams of a finished coat. He doesn't smile. He rarely does. But there's a content exhale, a hand brushing dust from his cloak, and that's how you know he's pleased. Over the next few days, you learn more about Subutai's psychological warfare tactics, things that would feel cartoonish if they weren't devastatingly effective. He sends spies ahead dressed as monks, spreading rumors that the Mongols are demons who can't be killed by arrows. He orders campfires lit by only 5 men, each one maintaining multiple fires, to give the illusion of a massive force. He plants abandoned weapons soaked in blood near mountain passes to scare enemy scouts. He even trains a small group of riders to drag multiple cloaks behind their horses to raise larger dust clouds. Historians still debate whether these ideas were Subutai's alone or part of a collective Mongol toolkit. The truth, Subutai didn't invent deception. He refined it until it sparkled like a whetstone. You witness one moment that encapsulates this perfectly. A Jin city sits behind a double curtain wall with watchtowers and a garrison twice your size. Most commanders would wait, starve it out, or build siege towers. Subutai. He sends in puppets. No, really. He has captured dummy straw men in armor loaded onto carts at night. The next morning, the defenders see what they believe are chained POWs being paraded past the gates. In fact, the puppets are filled with dry powder. When the gates swing open and the guards come charging out to reclaim their comrades, Subutai detonates the carts. Yes, exploding prisoners. You're too shocked to laugh at first, but the plan works, panic ensues, the gate remains open, and your forces charge in. Later, over dry meat and wine, Subutai says they opened the gate for straw. Now they eat fire. You don't know whether to toast or pray. His mind never rests. At one point, while discussing river fording with a local guide, he becomes obsessed with the idea of crossing upstream from where the enemy expects. Why? Because the enemy counts the fish bones floating down. That becomes a joke in camp. You see someone scribble Subutai counts fish on a horse's flank in charcoal. It doesn't slow him down. You help build false supply depots filled with empty sacks and pots just to bait enemy raiders. When the Jin troops attack one such depot, they're met by a hail of arrows hidden in wagons, and a small detachment that lights their own escape route on fire. Later, Subutai tells you he based the tactic on watching how wolves trap prey in snow by circling back to their own tracks. It's not all brilliance and explosions, though. There's an awkward night when you're cornered in a gorge by a faster-than-expected cavalry unit. You think it's over. Even Subutai seems surprised. Then he notices the wind shifting. He orders a fire set at the dry riverbed upstream. Within an hour, smoke fills the gorge, turning the moon into a blurry coin. The enemy hesitates. Subutai doesn't. You move under cover of smoke, outflank them, and scatter their ranks. When asked later how he knew the fire would help, Subutai simply replies, "I didn't. But it helped us more than them." That's a thing, he's not all-knowing. But he's willing to act with 70% certainty when others demand 100. He plays odds like a gambler with loaded dice. One quiet evening, you find him crouched over a dead sparrow, dissecting it. "Did you lose a bet?" you ask, mostly joking. "No," he says. "Birds change flight rhythm before storms. I want to know how." You back away slowly. There's a moment you'll never forget. The Jin general, captured after a failed ambush, sits bound before Subutai. The man spits insults, defiant to the last. Subutai leans in and asks, "Why did you wait in the gorge?" The general snarls, "It was the perfect place." Subutai nods. "For you, yes, for me too." He leaves the man there unharmed but humiliated. The message is clear: I knew your best move, and I used it against you. Later, Subutai tells you, some defeats echo louder when the defeated live. That's when you realize he's not just beating armies, he's writing fear into memory. He begins to map not just roads and cities, but patterns when the enemy sends reinforcements, how often they change guard shifts where they store rice versus weapons. He builds a living web of intelligence, and you are one of its threads. You once joked that he should retire and write a cookbook. He replies, deadpan, first lesson stew lasts longer when you cut the bones in half. You never eat stew the same way again. By the end of the Jin campaign, Subutai has proven he's not just a scout or even a general, he's something else. Something rarer. He's the kind of leader who doesn't just march to war, he shapes it, and leaves behind silence where noise once ruled. You're riding through the brittle silence of a windswept plain when you first hear whispers of Khwarazm. Traders mutter about it in fear. A vast empire rich with cities and arrogance, ruled by a Shah who thinks Mongols are little more than dust-choked savages. You hear stories of silk markets that stretch for miles, of citadels so tall they cast shade at noon, and of walls so thick they shrug off catapults like gnats. Subutai listens. Quietly, without expression. You can already tell he's not thinking of treasures or cities, he's thinking of supply chains. The mission begins with diplomacy. Genghis Khan sends envoys westward to the Khwarezmian Shah, offering trade cooperation peace. Subutai, of course, is chosen to accompany the mission from a safe distance, just in case things go sideways. They go very sideways. The Shah arrests the caravan. Worse, one of his governors has the envoys executed. The response from Genghis is swift, cold, and absolute. There will be no more letters, only war. You're not ready for how fast things escalate. Within months, an army of 100,000 is marching west, including Subutai and JB, another commander whose boldness borders on insanity. Their orders don't just destroy the Khwarezmian Empire, unravel it. The terrain is harsher than China, dry, rocky, blistering under the sun. Rivers are few and far between. Cities are fortified like fortresses. The enemy is used to conventional siege tactics. Subutai, as always, refuses to be conventional. He suggests a move no one expects, splitting off with a smaller force to make a wild, looping arc across the Shah's northern flank. A maneuver so bold it borders on suicidal. You ride with him, of course. You ride through snow one week and blazing heat the next. You cross deserts where even camels balk. You subsist on dry cheese and the occasional lucky hare. At one point, Subutai drinks water filtered through his own shirt. You pretend not to gag. Still, he keeps moving, faster than anyone thinks is possible. While Genghis attacks the cities from the east, Subutai appears suddenly in places no one thought he could reach. He strikes behind the enemy lines, hits supply depots, raids messenger posts, and vanishes into the horizon before alarm bells finish ringing. It's psychological carnage. One evening, as you camp near the edge of a ruined caravanserai, Subutai casually points out how the Shah's army is eating its own food too quickly. They don't ration like we do, he murmurs. They expect rescue, but no one is coming. He's right. You march on Samarkand, a jewel of the region, shimmering in heat and arrogance. The city is vast, confident in its garrison and walls. The Shah is nowhere to be seen. Subutai helps coordinate the siege, but not with brute force. Instead, he employs psychological collapse. He surrounds the city with fewer troops than the defenders expected, lighting thousands of fires at night to make it seem like twice as many. He plays drums constantly, day and night, denying rest. He releases prisoners near the gate, delirious and half dead, muttering about how cities further west have already fallen, even if they haven't. Then comes the camels. He lines them up in rows. Yes, actual camels, and lashes bundles of kindling to their backs. When the city finally attempts a sortie to break the siege, Subutai lights the bundles and drives the animals toward the gate. Panicked and aflame, the camels crash into the enemy lines. The chaos is unimaginable. You watch from a rooftop and wonder if sleep will ever come again. But Subutai doesn't revel in the horror. He simply walks the perimeter afterward, making notes. They expected honor, he says. We gave them fear. Historians still argue whether this episode marked a turning point in siege warfare. Some say it was cruelty. Others call it genius. Subutai never comments. Samarkand falls. You help oversee the city's pacification. There's little celebration. Only ash, the stench of blood, and the flapping of banners where laughter used to echo. Then, without pause, Subutai rides backward, not to rest but to trick. While the Shah's remaining forces regroup in the south, Subutai begins a campaign of misinformation. He releases false captives claiming the Mongols are retreating to China. He has scouts dress as merchants and claim that Genghis is sick. That winter has delayed further movement. That the horses are dying. All lies, all delivered with unsettling cheer. You help scatter these tales in bazaars and taverns. By the time the Shah moves his forces into a false sense of confidence, Subutai is already on the next step. Backtracking through the Hindu Kush, it's madness. No army has successfully crossed the mountains that time of year. The snow is thick, avalanches common. The narrow passes mean movement is slow and dangerous. But Subutai is undeterred. He divides his men into tight formations. He sends riders ahead to clear loose rock. He ties gear with extra rope. At one point, he makes you help dig snow caves for overnight shelter inside the mountains. You survive on bone broth, dried plums, and the warmth of furs that never quite stop smelling of horse. Yet somehow you make it through. And not just through. You emerge into the valley with momentum. The enemy never expected an attack from that side. Subutai leads a charge into the heartland of the Khwarezmian Empire, scattering the last of the resistance like dry leaves in a storm. He's not just chasing armies now, he's chasing the Shah himself. The campaign becomes a ghost hunt. You ride through city after city, just hours behind the Shah, whose movements grow increasingly erratic. Subutai seems to enjoy this game not for the blood, but for the pattern. The unraveling of a ruler's mind under pressure. Eventually, the Shah flees to a remote island in the Caspian Sea. Subutai shrugs. Let him rot, he says. Empires die faster than men. He's right. The Khwarezmian Empire, once one of the largest in Asia, is gone. And Subutai, he's already thinking about Europe. The snow crunches beneath your boots like thin glass, and every breath cuts the inside of your nose. You're standing outside Samarkand again, but this time the city is a whisper. Its fires cold, its markets silent, its defenders buried in long-forgotten ditches. Subutai isn't here to bask in victory. He's already drawing a new arc, eyes cast westward toward lands the Mongols have never touched. Toward mountains, rivers, cities built by empires with cathedrals and crusades, lands that don't yet know who Subutai is. Europe. But first comes a test and experiment. A raid through the edge of the known world to measure reaction response terrain and psychology. The target? The Rus principalities and their strange web of alliances and backstabbing. You ride with Subutai and Jibi, a thunderous duo of opposites. Subutai ever calm, ever precise. Jibi flamboyant and daring with the gleam in his eye that says, let's do something irresponsible. Together they lead a force of maybe 20,000 men. That's small by Mongol standards. But this isn't a conquest, this is a scalpel cut to the map's edge. The route westward is exhausting: frozen rivers, dead forests, thin villages where even the chickens look traumatized. You pass through the Caucasus like smoke, encountering tribes with names you can't pronounce, and customs that would make a steppe goat blush. Some fight, some flee. One group tries to ambush you with flaming carts. Subutai sends 5 riders around the ridge and cuts off their escape before they've even started. You see him do this again and again, predict, not just react. When you camp near a ruined fortress, he inspects the blackened walls with almost parental curiosity. They defend where they feel shame, he tells you, tapping a burn mark, not where we would attack. It's chilling how often he's right. Soon you arrive at the River Dawn. The Rus princes, fiercely independent, often feuding, have united briefly in the name of self-preservation. They gather an army that reportedly outnumbers you. You've seen this movie before. Subutai fakes retreat. Of course he does. He lures the Rus further and further across the steppe, even sending scouts to lead them on a merry chase for 9 straight days. When they finally catch up near the Kalka River, they're exhausted, stretched, overconfident. Subutai lays out the battlefield like a dinner spread. He divides the enemy forces, funnels them between hills, times each wave of engagement like a metronome. Then, when they break ranks to chase a seemingly weak Mongol unit, the trap springs. You watch it from a ridge, the slow rolling collapse of an army that thought it was winning for about 15 minutes. Arrows fall like rain. Cavalry loop behind them like silk cords. There's panic, shouting, the clanging of armor on armor, and then silence. Subutai doesn't allow looting, doesn't celebrate. He moves swiftly to secure information, maps, letters, even boots. He's studying everything: what kind of arrows they use, how their signals work, which captains broke formation first. Then comes the banquet. Several captured Rus nobles are invited to dine under the open sky. They're treated courteously, fed meat and wine. They start to relax. Then, without a word, Subutai has wooden planks laid across their bodies and orders his men to sit atop them and finish the meal. The nobles are slowly crushed beneath the weight of the victory feast. You watch this barely breathing. It's terrifying. It's symbolic. It's psychological warfare at its most intimate. Better than beheading, Subutai says later. The survivors will talk about it for generations. Historians still argue whether this was Subutai's idea or Jebe's. Some say it was a traditional Mongol execution method. Others believe it was a one-off message to the world. We are not just warriors, we are inevitability. You don't sleep much that night. After Kalka, the path west is eerily open. The princes have been humbled. The terrain, though challenging, has been mapped. Subutai now possesses priceless knowledge: river timing, supply locations, morale patterns, political fractures. This wasn't just a battle, it was a reconnaissance campaign disguised as conquest. But tragedy strikes. GB Subutai's bold counterpart is wounded in a skirmish. Infection sets in. There's no healer fast enough, no prayer strong enough. He dies under a low tree staring at the stars. Subutai says nothing for 2 days. You ride beside him in silence. He doesn't eat, doesn't speak, just rides. When he finally breaks his silence, it's with a single sentence: he rode like lightning, but never waited for the thunder. You carve that into the stock of your bow. Returning east takes a full year. You loop back across the steppe, avoiding familiar trails. Subutai is cautious, paranoid even. He leaves false trails, burns fake maps, and rotates the army's sleeping positions nightly. At one point, you camp near a mountain pass. Subutai spends 3 days studying the wind pattern. You think he's gone mad. Then on the 4th night, he positions your fires to echo like a larger army across the cliffs. Enemy scouts never approach. Once home, you expect accolades, celebration, maybe a warm bath. What you get is quiet. Subutai is debriefed thoroughly. He speaks little of the battles, but pages about terrain, trade patterns, the taste of river water near Kiev, which forests make good arrows, which cities panic fastest. The court listens, Genghis listens, and then Subutai returns to camp like nothing happened. You ask if he's proud. He replies, pride dulls the blade. In your mind, though, the blade is sharper than ever. What began as a scouting mission has become a blueprint, a roadmap for future conquests. Subutai has tested the European response, mapped their limitations, and measured the space between confidence and collapse. It's not about the cities, not about gold. It's about the rhythm of empire and how to break it. You're scaling a trail that barely deserves the name, just a crumbling vein of earth across the jagged spine of the Hindu Kush. Cold wind howls through every fold of your cloak, and your horse exhales puffs of steam that vanish before you can blink. Rocks slip underfoot. The air is thin enough to feel like punishment, and yet Subutai riding just ahead looks as calm as if he were crossing a palace courtyard. This isn't a march, it's a ghosting. A maneuver so implausible that no general would dare attempt it, not in winter, not with horses, not through these peaks. That's precisely why it's happening. The enemy won't look for you here. They think the passes are closed, the terrain impassable. They think a man as calculating as Subutai wouldn't risk it. They're wrong. You remember his words before you began this ascent. Paths exist where minds allow them, which is both poetic and deeply unhelpful when your feet are blistered and you've eaten nothing but dried tendon for 4 days. The idea is elegant in its madness loop back into enemy territory, not from the east like before, but from the south, through the most desolate range imaginable, hitting cities like ghosts. And to do that, you must leave behind signs, false signs. You help scatter feigned campsites, carefully placed ashes boot prints pressed with carved soles, droppings from mules that aren't even with you. Every time you descend into a valley, Subutai has already ordered a shadow trail left behind to make the army look twice its size and heading the wrong direction. Sometimes you wonder if he's strategizing for his enemies as much as for himself. One night, you're sitting near a flickering dung fire when he kneels beside you and draws a squiggly line in the dirt. "This is what they think we're doing," he says. Then he wipes it out. "But we'll do this instead." The new line loops curves cuts behind rivers, darts through forests like a hunted fox, and you realize he's not drawing tactics. He's drawing doubt. That's the weapon now. You finally emerge from the mountains into the river valleys below, and it's like stepping into a new world, lush, green, warm, unsuspecting. You feel like time travelers arriving from a forgotten age. And the cities here, they don't see you coming. One by one, settlements that had once celebrated the Mongols' retreat now see banners fluttering on their horizons. Only it's not a new army, it's the same army back again somehow. Ghost-like, undefeated, unstoppable. You descend upon them not as raiders, but as corrections to a mistake they thought they had survived. Some cities open their gates and surrender, others resist. Either way, Subutai doesn't repeat himself. If a trick worked once, he never tries it again. Instead, he evolves. When he approaches a walled city that had previously held out, he doesn't siege it. Instead, he circles it for days, cutting all exit paths but never attacking. He builds ramps that lead nowhere, siege towers that collapse intentionally. The defenders grow exhausted waiting. They waste arrows, they fast, they go mad. Then one morning they find their own well poisoned, not by force but by a small bag of herbs and animal waste, dropped in silently by a single rider the night before. The gates open, no battle needed. Subutai doesn't gloat. He doesn't even enter the city. He just walks the perimeter and rides on. You've started to see the pattern of his misdirection. He tells one unit to build 3 camps in a triangle, then rotates fires among them. Another unit plants false burial mounds as if many had died there, creating an illusion of failed skirmishes. You even help fake a mutiny by staging a mock brawl and abandoning a wagon of burned supplies. Spies pick it up. The next city underestimates your numbers. Historians still argue about the breadth of Subutai's deception campaign. Some estimate over 20 distinct misinformation tactics were deployed over a single winter. Others say it was closer to 40. Subutai never clarified, but you watched him rewrite the rules of warfare like someone rearranging furniture in a burning house calmly, thoughtfully, efficiently. Then comes the masterstroke. You reach a key garrison town guarding an intersection of trade routes. It's well-defended, stocked, and confident. Subutai approaches it in a way no one expects. He simply camps outside. No siege, no harassment, no negotiations. He just waits. For 10 days, nothing happens. No drums, no attacks, no communication. The city's soldiers grow uneasy. They anticipate a trick, a night raid, a tunnel, anything. Then Subutai leaves. No explanation, no damage done. He vanishes into the hills. 3 weeks later, when news reaches that same city of nearby settlements, falling, the garrison abandons the post, voluntarily believing they are next. They leave the gates open. You ride in with Subutai utterly unopposed. You look at him baffled. He shrugs. Fear eats faster than fire. Sometimes he speaks in riddles, sometimes in whispers, but always with purpose. Once he orders a dead horse tied to a tree beside a remote village. Nothing else, no bodies, no arrows, just the horse and a single Mongol saddle. 2 days later, scouts report the village elders offering food, water, and maps. They think they're next. They're not. But they don't know that. You ask him why the horse. He replies even flies carry messages, and still he gathers information. You're tasked with noting the color of river sediment. Others record how long it takes local markets to clear bread once rumor spreads of Mongol advance. He wants data not just on war, but on human behavior. You begin to see his mind as a living archive, sorting, indexing, filing fears and flaws like tools. You ask him once what the hardest thing about war is. He thinks for a long time, then says, not winning, leaving them with the right memory. By the end of the Hindu Kush campaign, Subutai hasn't just carved a path through cities, he's etched uncertainty into an entire region. No one knows where he'll strike next, or when, or if. They just know he might. And that's often enough. You're watching a fire burn in the shape of a perfect circle. Subutai's idea, of course, a line of small campfires lit around an empty patch of steppe. No tents inside, no horses, no people. Just light. Why? So that spies watching from afar think there's a command tent at the center. Maybe even Subutai himself. It's bait, a glowing question mark designed to confuse, delay, and exhaust enemy scouts. This is where it begins the art of making ghosts. You're riding with an army that seems far larger than it is. Subutai starts to manipulate perception as much as terrain. Campfires triple. Patrols rotate in overlapping loops. Scouts leave footprints in opposing directions. Even arrowheads are scattered where no skirmish occurred. Little breadcrumbs of manufactured chaos. It's not trickery for trickery's sake. It's strategic camouflage performed at the scale of continents. Soon you begin faking everything. Wounds smeared with animal blood, wagon tracks drawn with ox hoof molds, camps built just to be abandoned. You spend an entire afternoon helping dig fake latrines so enemy scouts think you stayed longer than you did. You once drop a scroll in a village that names a false commander and an imaginary supply depot. Subutai plants the idea, and within a week an enemy column moves to intercept a ghost. They never return. The maps get stranger too. Subutai has cartographers redraw terrain, not how it is, but how he wants others to believe it is. A dried-up stream becomes a fordable path. A treacherous slope becomes a promising hill. Some commanders scoff, until they get lost. Historians still debate the origins of these illusion maps. Were they Mongol innovations or refinements of Chinese cartography? Regardless, you watch one unroll like a painting, mountains inked in the wrong place, roads shortened by days, cities puffed up like ripe fruit ready to fall, a weapon disguised as parchment. And yet, Subutai isn't always deceptive. When it serves him better, he's exactly what the enemy expects. That's the twist. You recall a raid into a fortified village known for rapid alarms. Instead of sneaking in Subutai lights torches 2 miles out, bangs drums and approaches in a tight, loud column. They panic. The defenders think they're already surrounded. Gates are thrown open by fleeing citizens before a single arrow flies. You step over burning wagons, dazed livestock, and a commander who surrendered to a force he never even saw. Subutai looks around and says simply, "Sometimes the truth is the loudest lie." You begin to understand the layers of this strategy. It's not just deceit. It's rhythm predictable enough to lull, chaotic enough to break. He's composing confusion like music, letting silence and noise take turns on the battlefield. And all this reaches a crescendo in enemy communication lines. Subutai hates messengers. Not his own, but theirs. He begins a full-scale campaign of intercept manipulation and reverse messaging. You don't just stop the enemy's letters, you answer them. You help draft responses in careful calligraphy, mimicking regional dialects. You copy seals with wax impressions. You relay false coordinates, delivery times, even troop health reports. Entire regiments are redirected based on letters you helped forge. Once Subutai has you ride ahead and deliver a message to the wrong army on purpose. It contains detailed information about a supposed Mongol plan to attack from the west. Naturally, they prepare for that. He attacks from the north. The result, a battle over before noon. He tells you afterward a letter can move faster than a horse. So, make the letter run in circles. But his most brilliant ruse, the one that earns legends and whispers, involves the fake retreat that loops back into itself. Here's how it works. He orders his men to retreat, genuinely, full withdrawal, supply carts burned, campfires extinguished. The enemy celebrates. Scouts report full dispersal. 3 days pass. Then Subutai returns from behind. No one can explain it. The defenders thought they'd won. They were writing letters home. But Subutai had only pulled a slingshot. He left just enough forgotten men and horses behind to bait pursuit, then circled a long arc through a dry riverbed and re-entered the region from the side the enemy had left unguarded. You arrive as archers already occupy the towers. No battle, just bewildered silence. How did you get here? Subutai smiles. We never left. That phrase stays with you. It becomes a metaphor, a chilling mantra. Because even when he disappears from the battlefield, his mind is still there. Thinking, looping, bending time. You see this again when he develops his invisible cavalry tactic. Here's the secret. One scout group rides in tight formation toward a known village. At the right bend in the road, they split into 5, riding in parallel trails, each taking a path that passes in view of different enemy outposts. From the outside, it looks like 5 different armies approaching simultaneously. Villages surrender before you reach them. You ask him why he never just attacks straight on. He answers, the shortest path is the one they don't block. And then there's the whisper campaigns. Subutai has captured prisoners released intentionally, fed with elaborate lies beforehand. He plants stories in their minds. The Mongols only kill those who resist. They leave cities untouched if gates are opened. Subutai rides a horse that never tires. They speak these rumors like truths. By the time you reach your next target, you're greeted by villagers carrying white cloth, offering fermented milk, singing strange prayers to the General of Smoke. You don't correct them. Even weather becomes a tool. Before major river crossing, Subutai studies the wind pattern across the water. He waits until the river is misted and lightless. You cross under cover of fog so thick even the birds get lost. The defenders never know you arrived. Later, he'll claim the earth offers cover to those who listen. You wonder if he says that to sound wise or just to mess with you. You start to notice he never eats before battle, never jokes the night before a move, and always checks the silence whether crickets chirp, whether dogs bark. If they don't, something's off. You've seen him call off entire operations because of quiet trees. Historians argue over whether this was superstition or advanced environmental awareness. You know the answer. It was both. Because Subutai doesn't just read maps, he reads air, wind, noise, fear, and what he's building slowly and invisibly is a kind of psychological terrain, a landscape of assumptions he can sculpt like sand. By the time you reach the next campaign staging ground, everyone's on edge. Even the horses step carefully. And Subutai, he's standing at the ridge again, looking at shadows. Not for enemies, but for ideas. You're waking up to the kind of cold that crawls under your skin and settles somewhere behind your ribs. The grass is stiff with frost and your eyelids crunch as you blink. You didn't bring enough blankets. You never do. Welcome to the Russian winter. Subutai's campaign into the Rustlands isn't a march, it's a performance. A long, drawn-out act in which the enemies play their roles exactly as he intends, rarely realizing they were cast long before the curtain rose. You move through frozen forests past silent, shuttered villages where even the crows seem hesitant to caw. Every breath is a ghost. Every hoofbeat echoes like a drumbeat in a cathedral. This is the build-up to the Battle of the Kalka River, though no one quite knows it yet. The Rus Princes, a notoriously bickering group of proud men, have finally united. Mostly. There's mutual distrust, conflicting reports, and an air of noble stubbornness. Subutai counts on it. He rides with Jebe again, two sides of the same spear. Jebe is the fire, the lightning, the sudden roar. Subutai is the silence just before. Their dynamic is strange, but it works. Subutai draws the plans. JB runs ahead and makes them happen. You're tasked with trailing Rus scouts. You don't engage. You don't speak. You just let them see you. That's the point. They chase you. A few small skirmishes break out, always ending with the Mongols pulling back, never quite caught. It's not cowardice, it's tempo. Subutai is setting the pace of the war like a conductor tapping his baton. The Rus think they're winning. Subutai lets them think that. Every move is deliberate. Even the Mongol camps are built sloppily on purpose. Horses are left untied. Cook fires are scattered, not organized. It's all theater. A military costume party meant to convince the Rus that the Mongols are overextended, underfed, and vulnerable. You help set up these scenes. You even hang old bones near a half-burned tent as if your comrades had fled in panic. The enemy's scouts eat it up. By the time the Rus army crosses into the plains near the Kalka River, they're feeling confident. Too confident. Subutai springs the trap. It starts as always with a retreat, a calculated fallback. Mongol forces seem to crumble and flee, drawing the Rus deeper into unfamiliar territory. You ride like your life depends on it because it does. You're not just retreating, you're guiding. Herding like wolves do, steering your prey to the place you've already chosen. The Kalka River cuts across a shallow valley. There are no high hills, no vantage points, just a river, a few muddy banks, and nowhere to run once you're there. Subutai divides the enemy, splinters them, and then attacks. The Mongols appear not from one direction, but three. Arrows whistle from tree lines, horsemen burst from dry creek beds. Jebe's cavalry strikes first, then withdraws. Subutai's reserves hit the flanks. It's not a battle. It's a folding of space, closing, suffocating. The Rus formation collapses within an hour. Historians still argue about the numbers. Some say the Rus had 60,000 men. Others say it was closer to 30,000. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Subutai broke them without ever seeming to try. And then the aftermath. Captured nobles are treated strangely well. They're fed, given blankets, even wine. You're confused, this isn't the usual way. But then Subutai orders planks laid across their chests. His men sit upon them and finish their dinner. The crushing is slow, deliberate. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't watch, he just walks away. Later, someone asks why he didn't simply execute them. Subutai replies, "This way the survivors will dream of it, and the dead will echo. You try to forget the sound it made, you don't succeed." After the battle, the Mongols vanish, just gone. No towns are occupied, no castles seized, no territory claimed. Subutai isn't here to hold land. He's here to learn. And learn he does. You help gather maps, boot scraps of letters. Subutai debriefs every scout, every wounded prisoner. He asks about river fords, local harvest, church bells, mud thickness. He builds a picture of the land so detailed you swear he could sketch it blindfolded. One moment sticks in your mind. He picks up a splintered rust lance, turns it in his hands, and mutters, "Too heavy," slows the arm. You realize he's not just learning how to beat these armies, he's learning how they think. Their tools, their traditions, their mistakes. This campaign is a reconnaissance with teeth. And just when you think the operation is over, he turns west. Now he's moving deeper, not toward conquest, but toward data. He avoids cities favoring towns near crossroads, river crossings, and relay stations. He's not chasing gold or glory, he's chasing patterns. Where do nobles flee? How fast do riders travel? How long before a rumor travels from one market to another? You realize he's not preparing to invade, he's preparing to understand. Subutai tells you one morning over dried fish and sour milk, "A king holds land, I hold time." That sentence rattles around in your skull for weeks. He tests how long enemy soldiers chase him. He pushes supply lines to the brink, then snaps them like a dry twig to see who responds. He uses controlled failure as a teaching tool. Once he intentionally lets an enemy caravan escape just to see where it runs. Turns out it leads to a hidden fortress not marked on any map. You take it the next day, and he's not done. You notice that his maps now include wind patterns, sunset angles, even bird migrations. He times crossings of rivers to avoid glare. He positions camps not for comfort, but to control sound flow where hoofbeats will echo where they'll muffle. He starts to use local children as messengers. Why? Because they blend in. They're ignored, but they hear everything. He pays them in small knives and berries. Soon his intelligence network stretches across hundreds of miles, a web of whispers and hoofbeats and dust trails. By the end of this winter, Subutai hasn't just defeated an army. He's defeated assumptions. The Rus thought you'd come to take land. The cities thought they'd been spared. The West thought you couldn't survive the snow. They were all wrong. You ask Subutai what comes next. He gazes west into the cold haze of early dawn. There are mountains, then rivers, then kings, he says. But first we vanish. And just like that, the army folds into the mist again. No banners, no goodbye. Just the memory of hooves on frozen earth. You wake up not to the sound of war drums or galloping hooves, but laughter. Subutai's camp is quiet, the kind of eerie quiet that follows something massive like the hush after a thunderclap. Only now the echoes are shaped like disbelief, because last night your enemies dined with you. Yes, it happened. A feast ordered by Subutai himself, arranged for the captured nobles of a defeated city near the Dnieper River. A lavish spread by step standards laid out with roast meat, fermented mare's milk, and hard cakes that could chip a tooth if you weren't careful. The mood had been light. Oddly so. Toasts were made. Jokes told. Even a song or two murmured over flickering firelight. Some of the Rus princes allowed themselves to relax. And then came the boards. Thick wooden planks, heavy and creaking, carried by silent soldiers. The nobles were led gently, yes, gently to the ground. No shouting, no iron chains. Just suggestion and steady pressure. Then the boards were laid across their chests. And then the Mongols sat down and resumed their meal. You didn't eat, you couldn't. The weight, literal and symbolic, crushed bone and dignity alike. Their ribs gave way slowly under the strain of men calmly chewing mutton. Not in fury, not in passion, just efficiency. This was not vengeance, it was messaging. Subutai's strategy was always one of precision, not just in movement, but in memory. He didn't want the survivors to recall a massacre. He wanted them to remember the method. Later that night, you find him outside the camp seated alone, sharpening a blade with soft, patient strokes. Too cruel, you ask. He doesn't look up. Too memorable, he answers, then adds, but sometimes that's the point. You've been with Subutai long enough to understand. He's not trying to scare armies. He's trying to reshape how they think. This is the pivot in his career, and you feel it in your bones. No longer is he simply outmaneuvering forces on the battlefield. He's outmaneuvering cultures. He starts tailoring tactics to specific psychological profiles. In some cities, he attacks food stores first, knowing hunger breeds panic faster than arrows. In others, he seizes temples or churches not to destroy them, but to sit in them, quietly, as if daring the gods to object. In one case, he arranges for a priest to be given exclusive safe passage, then spreads word of the priest's divine immunity being Mongol granted. The local faithful begin to believe Subutai serves a higher will. He lets the myth do the work. You spend an entire week shadowing villages not to conquer them, but to map how fear flows. When rumors of an impending Mongol attack spread, which roads fill first? Where do the merchants run? Who hoards water? Which gates close early? You track these reactions on scrolls. Subutai calls them behavioral maps. And soon you realize he has more of these than he has military charts, it becomes clear Subutai isn't building a warpath. He's building a predictive model of collapse. There's a city on the edge of what's now Hungary. Proud, well-armed, surrounded by forest. He doesn't attack it. Instead, he has your unit cut all trees nearby. Nothing overt, just a few each night. Enough to make the locals uneasy. Then he bribes a fleeing merchant to spread the story that the Mongols are clearing a path for a siege engine, a massive trebuchet the size of a house. There is no trebuchet, just rumors, whispers, shadows. But the townspeople evacuate. When you ride in, it's not a conquest, it's a tour. You ask Subutai later if he ever intended to attack. No, he says. They did it for me. There's something else brewing, too. A new layer to his warfare. He begins experimenting with time distortion, not in the metaphysical sense, but in perception. He sends riders a day early, setting up camps in full view of a city, then vanishes. Then he returns 2 days later from a different direction. Sometimes he does this 3 times in a week. By the end, the defenders are so sleep-deprived they mistake deer for cavalry. Historians call this cognitive siege. He called it patience under motion. There's one tactic he becomes particularly fond of: the looped march. You ride with him on one such maneuver. The army approaches a region at dawn. Scouts are seen. Dust is kicked up. Fires are lit. Then nothing. You circle back under cover of dusk, arriving again from a completely different side. To the enemy, it seems as though 2 armies are converging. They send a messenger to confirm. You intercept him. Replace his scroll. By the time the city commander receives it, it contains coordinates that are off by exactly 1 day's march. Just enough to shift preparation in the wrong direction. When the attack finally happens from the real direction, it's over in hours. Subutai didn't beat the walls. He beat the calendar. You begin to lose your sense of time, too. Marches blend together. Cities fall, surrender, vanish. You pass through 3 cultures in 1 month. Languages melt in your ears, but the rhythm remains. Advance, disappear, echo, strike, vanish. There's one morning you remember vividly. A fog clings to the riverbank. The horses are restless. Subutai squats in the reeds listening. He raises one hand, pauses, then says, "No dogs bark." That's all he says. You reroute the entire army based on that sentence. Hours later, you find the ambush a row of sharpened stakes hidden under brush, enough to gut half your cavalry. How did you know, you ask? No dogs, he says again, mounting up. No children crying. Too quiet. Fear leaves holes. By now, his decisions no longer surprise you. He's become an orchestra conductor with an invisible baton. When to stir panic. When to offer peace. When to retreat, not because he must, but because he wants you to chase him. And always, always he arrives somewhere you didn't expect. Subutai's campaigns aren't chains of battles. They're a string of unfolding doubts. You start hearing his name in markets, in prayers, in threats whispered to misbehaving children. "The ghosts are coming," one mother says. You smile, because you know they already did. You can hear it before you see it Europe. The clang of bells from stone churches, the thick hum of languages. You don't understand the scent of damp wool and wood smoke instead of grass and horse sweat. You're entering a land that thinks it's the center of the world, a continent bristling with kings, borders, flags, and paperwork, and it has no idea what's coming. Subutai knows he's not entering this new theater with fire and thunder. He's bringing a measuring tape. You arrive with him at the edge of the Carpathian Mountains. The passes are narrow, frozen, and strangely quiet. On the other side, the kingdom of Hungary swelling with self-assurance. To the north, the Polish duchies fractured and proud. Further west, the Holy Roman Empire watches nervously from behind its increasingly irrelevant parchments. You're part of a small detachment scouting rivers that curl like snakes and roads that pinch between hills like bottlenecks. Subutai marks everyone, not just on the map but in his head. You sleep in the shadow of ruined watchtowers. You eat stolen rye bread. You cross rivers on rafts lashed with goat-hide rope. And always Subutai is one step ahead. You think you've seen brilliance before, but now he's glowing. He splits his forces into 3 groups stretching westward in a kind of military mist. Each army appears independently, but they move like parts of the same thought. One moves through Poland attacking from the north. Another enters Transylvania. A third, led by Subutai himself, loops deep around, heading for the Hungarian plains. You've never seen warfare shaped like this. It's not a front, it's a net. And it's working. In Poland, Subutai sends his vanguard toward the city of Krakow. He doesn't besiege it. He burns its suburbs, then withdraws. Why? To send a message. To show strength without attachment. To make the next city panic before the Mongols even arrive. Soon the Duchy of Silesia mobilizes. Subutai lets them. He baits a coalition army led by Duke Henry II into a direct confrontation near the city of Liegnitz. It's a classic maneuver: lure them with smoke and skirmishes, then crush them when their ranks stretch and confidence blooms. You arrive the morning of the battle. The battlefield is flat, muddy, and surrounded by low hills. The enemy forces are larger, by some accounts nearly double. There are Teutonic knights flying banners with crosses, confident and armored like walking fortresses. Subutai doesn't flinch. He waits, lets the Polish army advance. He sends out light cavalry to harass retreat, draw them in. Same old dance. But then the smoke screens begin. You're ordered to set fire to damp straw and leaves, creating thick, choking clouds across the battlefield. Visibility drops to almost nothing. The wind shifts perfectly. Subutai strikes. Hidden behind the smoke, he unleashes flanking cavalry at the enemy's rear. Confusion reigns. Orders vanish into the fog. Knights charge in the wrong direction. Infantry stumble over one another. The result: annihilation. The Teutonic knights fall. Duke Henry is killed. His head is found days later mounted on a lance with his own helmet. Subutai does not wait to celebrate. He turns immediately south toward Hungary. The Polish campaign was never the main show. It was a test, a distraction, a rattle of the gate. The real blow is about to land. You cross into Hungary like a whisper. towns empty before you arrive. Some are abandoned altogether. Subutai orders maps updated in real time. Villages that no longer exist are erased without ceremony. You reach the Hungarian plains just as spring begins to melt the frost. It's green, wide, soft, perfect cavalry terrain. But this time Subutai won't surprise them. The Hungarians know you're coming. King Bailiff IV has assembled a massive army, perhaps 80,000 strong. Nobles, knights, infantry, foreigners, volunteers. They dig in near the Mohi plain, confident that numbers and armor will turn the tide. Subutai studies the terrain for days. There's a river, the Sajo, with a single stone bridge. He waits for the perfect moment. Night falls. You crouch in the shadows as Mongol engineers construct a pontoon bridge upriver silently. A second crossing point unseen. Meanwhile, the main Mongol camp built on the far side of the Sajo appears vulnerable. The trap is set. The Hungarians send their vanguard across the stone bridge in the early morning, hoping to ambush, but Subutai already knew they'd come. The Mongols counterattack brutally. At the same time, the second wing crossing the pontoon bridge sweeps into the Hungarian flank from the north. Cavalry emerge like ghost arrows, fall like ash. Within hours, what was once a disciplined army turns into a rout. You ride through the smoke with Subutai watching as the Hungarian lines fold in on themselves. Some try to flee across the bridge only to find it destroyed. Others dive into the river and drown. By evening, the Mohi plain is silent. Dead horses steam in the cool air. Shields lie split like fruit peels. A crusader's sword still glows red from fire. The ground is soft, wet. You pick your way through it and you realize this isn't just victory. It's symphony. Each maneuver timed like a note. Each flank, each bluff, each misdirection deliberate. There's no chaos here, just control. Subutai rides slowly across the field, silent. He stops only to pick up a fallen cross and stare at it. He turns it in his hand. Faith without strategy, he says softly, is just a monument. He tosses it into the mud. Historians still argue whether Subutai was a military genius or simply lucky with competent subordinates. They debate his ruthlessness, his cruelty, his innovation. But you were there, and you know the truth. It wasn't luck. It wasn't brutality. It was clarity. He saw what others couldn't. Not just the land, not just the armies, but the patterns. And now Europe sees him too. Not as a barbarian, but as a storm. The field at Mohi is quiet now, eerily so. Smoke still curls from collapsed tents. A boot floats along the bank of the Sajo River, bumping gently against reeds. You dismount in the aftermath, feet squishing into the sodden ground, and it hits you. Subutai didn't just win, he rewrote the rules. Europe has seen battles. It has seen sieges, civil wars, crusades. But nothing like this. Not the speed, not the silence, not the way the Mongols came and went like a plague carried on wind. And still Subutai's not done. While others would pause, consolidate, celebrate, he's already walking the perimeter of the Hungarian camp, noting positions, discarded armor, the angle of wagon wheels stuck in mud. You trail behind, exhausted, watching as he traces out the next problem. Because for him, victory isn't a finish line, it's data. He studies the escape routes, he listens to what the villagers say, he observes where the enemy fled not just physically, but psychologically. Who fled fastest, who fought longest, who tried to surrender. He's not charting Hungary, he's charting how people break. And then he starts playing with that. You spend the next weeks helping implement his final test. These aren't battles, they're lab experiments. A town is approached from the east but surrounded from the west. Another is left untouched while 3 nearby are burned. One nobleman is allowed to escape carrying a warning. Another is captured and paraded as a sign of mercy. You realize he's collecting responses, charting rumor speeds, mapping cultural tolerances. You once ask him why not just finish the job? Push to Vienna, take it all. He looks at you tired perhaps, but clear-eyed and replies, because I don't want what they have. I want to know how long they'll keep it once they know I can take it any time. You don't sleep well that night. There's a moment that encapsulates it all. A small fortress in the west surrenders preemptively. No battle, no siege. They simply lower their flags and present the keys. Subutai accepts nods, then hands the keys back. Defend your town, he tells the trembling mayor. You'll do it better with fear. He doesn't garrison the city, doesn't loot it, he just leaves. The garrison, however, remains on edge for months expecting a return. They triple their guard, refuse to plant crops, panic when birds scatter. The fear does more damage than fire ever could. And Subutai, he's already looping back through the Carpathians. Because something has changed. News has arrived Genghis Khan's successor Ogedei has died. It's an echo that reaches even the farthest outposts. Mongol generals across Europe halt waiting to see what this means. Subutai, of course, sees it differently. Others argue about succession. He sees breathing room, a chance to measure the final ripples of his campaign before returning east. You begin your ride back retracing some of the same roads, only now they feel different. Villages that once stood proud now sit abandoned. Fields lie fallow. Trade routes are broken. Some towns rebuild, others pretend nothing happened. But every one of them knows his name. They whisper it differently. In Hungary, he's the silent general. In Poland, the shadow bow. In Germany, they call him Subutai, the sleepless, the man who doesn't stop. And indeed, he rarely sleeps. On the long ride back, he only dozes in snatches, head bowed on saddle horn dreams, stitched from maps and hoofbeats. You ride beside him, and for the first time he speaks not of tactics but of time. These people think war comes and goes, he says. But war doesn't end, it just moves. He believes that the Mongols have proven something not just to kings and castles, but to ideas themselves. The idea that geography protects you, that distance is safety, that winter defends the north. All wrong? Because Subutai made the world smaller, and now the old rules don't work. He tells you in passing that he thinks Europe will forget, that kings will rebuild and assume the Mongols won't return, that cities will regrow, coins will be minted, alliances will shift. But he adds the shape of their nightmares has changed. There's one final event that lingers. You're resting near a mountain path when a delegation arrives, nobles from the west bearing gifts. They offer gold horses grain. Not to bribe, not to beg, but to understand. They want to know, what do you want? Subutai smiles, not a smirk, a real smile. He says, we already have what we want. They're confused, he clarifies. We wanted to know how you would fight. Now we know. And that's it. He sends them away unharmed, gifts untouched. He rides on over rivers that once ran red past villages that no longer wave banners beneath skies that feel somehow emptier. No parade awaits him. No monument is built. No songs are sung in his name. But he leaves behind a continent where children will grow up afraid of hoofbeats in the dark, where generals will build walls not just higher but wider, where maps will be redrawn not from conquest but from possibility. And he rides with only one thought, not what if we return, but how long until they forget that we could. The frost has softened into mist as you descend into Poland again. But this time, it's not for conquest, it's for calibration. Subutai's return to Poland is not a march of revenge or greed. It's something stranger, something subtler. It's as if he's running a diagnostic on a continent, poking gently at the edges to see how much memory lingers. The Battle of Liegnitz is already a tale told in whispers, how a numerically superior European force, including the famous Teutonic Knights, was crushed in the fog by what many believed were demons. You were there. You remember the smell of the smoke, the taste of ash in your teeth. How Subutai's cavalry looped like falcons behind the enemy, while decoys kept them distracted in front. It was too perfect, too fast. Now you're retracing that trail, And what you find is predictable. Walls rebuilt, towns rechristened, a few sharpened stakes where gates used to be. But the people, still afraid. They don't know you've returned. Not yet. You ride quietly this time. You watch. You count how many guards are stationed at night, how many blacksmiths are working, how many fields are left fallow. It's not an invasion, it's a follow-up visit. You pass a monastery that once rang its bells defiantly during your approach. Now, no bells, just shuttered windows and a single monk peeking through a crack in the door. He's not sure if he's seeing a memory or a ghost. You don't stop. Subutai's gaze never lingers. He's not here to punish. He's here to observe the echo. He divides your forces again not to attack, but to be seen. Small groups ride through river towns in loose formation, appearing, vanishing, reappearing miles away. No arrows are fired. No battles waged. And yet panic spreads faster than fire. One evening you overhear a merchant whisper to another that the Mongols have returned with dragons. You don't correct him. Subutai's tactic here is simple. He doesn't create new fear, he reactivates the old. Historians would later call this phantom pressure. The idea that simply showing up without conflict could cause fortresses to abandon post-grain, to be hoarded economies to slow. He calls it the tax of memory. You stop in a burned-out town where wooden crosses still stand among the rubble. A woman offers you salted bread with shaking hands. Her son hides behind her skirt. She thinks you're here to finish what you started. Subutai tells her you survived. That's more than most. She nods. And that's the end of it. But the most remarkable part of this return isn't fear, it's what's missing. No coordinated military response. No unified defense. Just whispers, hastily written messages on horseback priests calling for prayer kings writing letters that arrive too late. You realize Europe is still fractured. Even after Mohi, even after Liegnitz, no one has learned to move together. Subutai does not celebrate this. He simply makes a note. You find him that night in a copse of trees near a river bend, drawing again in the dirt. He's mapping reaction time. From the moment of first contact, how long until a city alerts the next? How quickly do mounted messengers leave? How fast do fortifications fill? He records not just how they fight, but how they wait to fight. You ask half joking if he plans to invade again. He says nothing for a while, then murmurs, "You don't need to burn a house twice. You just need to prove you still hold the torch." That becomes the theme of this phase. You ride to the edges of Bohemia, then turn back not because you're repelled, but because it was never the goal. Subutai is mapping the edge of Mongol reach, not where it ends, but where it's felt. At one outpost, you hear a bishop is training peasants with pitchforks. Subutai hears this and says, "That's good. Pitchforks mean fewer prayers." He's only half joking. Then comes one of the strangest moments of the campaign. A town throws a feast. Yes, a feast. Not in welcome, but in surrender before arrival. They light fires, prepare tables, and leave their gates open, hoping that the Mongols will ride past if greeted not with swords, but with meat. Subutai hears of it, laughs once genuinely, then rides around the city. They never see you, but for weeks they keep the feast hall set just in case. And in the West, Vienna panics. Papal letters fly like swarms of flies, desperate, dramatic, mostly useless. Some call for crusades, some for fortifications, some suggest appeasement. But all of them share one thing. They know the name Subutai, and they know he's not attacking, which is somehow worse. Because a man like him doesn't pause without purpose. You ask him one night under a violet sky brushed with stars why he doesn't just keep going. France lies open. The Holy Roman Empire is wobbling. Even Italy could be reached. He shakes his head. They're not ready yet, he says. If you strike a cracked wall, you get rubble. But if you wait, you get a doorway. You don't entirely understand. You're not sure if he means military strategy, psychological timing, or something else entirely. With Subutai meaning stack like armor. Simple on the outside, intricate beneath. Before long, the return journey begins, quietly, without ceremony. The Mongol forces vanish from Europe much like they arrived without warning. And in their place, nothing. No governors, no tax collectors, no occupation forces. Just stories. Stories of battles lost to ghosts, of cities surrendered to rumors, of generals who mapped mines instead of roads. Europe breathes again. But now it breathes differently. It listens to wind with more care. It watches the horizon longer, and every hoofbeat in the distance sounds just a bit too loud. Because they've realized something that Subutai never said out loud but you understood all along. He didn't want the land. He wanted the memory. The forests are thinning behind you now. The rivers are flowing eastward again, and the smell of the steppe begins to return, dry sweet spiced with sun-baked grass and the faint tang of horse sweat. You're going home. Or rather, back to the place that made Subutai. But even on the return march, he's working. No, not strategizing his next move. Not yet. He's deconstructing the last one. You've seen Subutai in many moods stoic before a battle, amused by enemy missteps, tired but alert under stars, but now he's contemplative. Not melancholic, analytical. Each evening while others sleep, he takes stones and arranges them in shapes. Circles, zigzags, tight clusters. He calls them rhythms, not formations, not armies. Rhythms. You're beginning to understand how he sees warfare. To most, it's a contest. To him, it's an instrument. He doesn't just beat enemies, he plays them. Feeds their egos, matches their tempo, then shifts key, and leaves them collapsing into silence. The return through the Carpathians is smoother this time. The Mongols know every bend and gully now. You pass fields that once held enemy camps, now just empty earth. Villages that once panicked, now lie deserted or subdued. And yet Subutai pauses at each one. He listens, not for people, for absence. He once tells you a wise man learns from what he hears, a great one from what he doesn't. There's a village where dogs don't bark anymore. He notes that. They've grown used to fear, he mutters. It doesn't stop at villages. He listens to the way horses respond to certain valleys. He watches cloud shapes across plains. At one point, he halts the entire army for a day because the birds are flying the wrong direction. No one argues. No one even asks. Because everyone knows by now he sees things before they're seen. And when you reach the open steppe again, there's no cheer, no triumph. Only wind and motion. And Subutai sitting in the saddle like he's still mapping possibilities in his mind. You settle back into the Mongol heartlands as if waking from a long fever dream. Genghis Khan is gone. Ogadai, his successor, has passed as well. The empire waits, breathing, coiling. Subutai doesn't rush to the capital. He sends reports, quietly, briefly, mostly facts, not opinions. He doesn't tell them how brilliant he was. He lets Europe do that. The Mongol court, meanwhile, is shifting. New faces, new alliances, new questions. But Subutai remains outside it all, both revered and somehow apart. He doesn't dress richly, doesn't own large lands. He refuses titles beyond those he's earned. When asked what reward he seeks, he answers a new saddle. Mine creaks now. They give him a palace. He uses it to store maps. And then the stories begin. First from merchants, then diplomats, then envoys from terrified kings. They say he commands spirits, that his horses don't tire, that his arrows whisper your name before they strike, and perhaps the strangest story that he can speak without sound, transmit thoughts across miles through fire and wind. Subutai hears these tales, laughs once, then says, if they believe that we've already won. Historians later try to piece together what happened in Europe. They count dead. They draw battle maps. They marvel at the sheer distance the Mongols covered. But what they miss, what you know, is that Subutai didn't need to conquer a continent. He needed to visit it, once. Just long enough to leave a blueprint in its memory. There's a moment months after returning where you find him sitting outside his tent, tracing shapes in the dirt again. Not tactics, not cities, just loops, spirals. You ask him what they are. He looks up and says mistakes. Not yours, theirs. He's cataloging the blind spots that led nations to ruin, the belief that distance protects, the hope that alliances will hold, the arrogance of numbers, the pride of walls. He writes each into his dirt spiral like a prayer, and then he wipes them clean. You ask what's next. He shrugs. The empire decides. But the road doesn't stop. It never stops. Indeed, new campaigns are being whispered. Toward Song China, toward Persia again, even the distant lands of the sea. But Subutai, he just waits. He has nothing to prove, no crown to wear, no city to rule. He doesn't build statues, doesn't inscribe his name in stone. He lets his maps do that. He's said to have commanded 65 battles, won all but one, spanned thousands of miles, crushed armies 5 times the size of his own, and vanished before songs could be written. A general who didn't just fight wars, he designed what war would become. And now he rides still. You hear it in the way soldiers whisper when the wind shifts. You see it in the way cities position their walls wider, lower angled. You feel it when you look at the sky and wonder how far a man can move before becoming legend. Because Subutai was never just a man. He was a question, a whisper beneath history's breath. What if the storm had stayed? Dawn breaks over the endless Mongol steppe, washing the grasslands in a pale gold that seems to stretch forever. You're no longer counting cities burned or bridges crossed. You're counting miles and memories now. And you're not alone in that. Subutai rides beside you, quiet as ever, his posture unchanged, after decades in the saddle. But something is different. His movements are slower, not weaker, just deliberate. Like a man aware that he's not racing anymore, he's measuring. You've just completed another campaign, a victory. The details blur now somewhere in the southern fringes of the Song dynasty. Another fortress fell, another general surrendered. You forget his name. Subutai doesn't. He remembers everything. But he doesn't talk about it anymore. Instead, he watches the horizon. You've begun to notice how often he pauses, not to rest, to listen, to air, to horse hooves, to the absence of birds. One evening you camp beneath a ridge. The wind has changed direction. Subutai doesn't speak for hours. Then, out of nowhere, he says, "There were 10,000 of them, and not one of them looked up." You know he's remembering Mohai. Or maybe Legnitz, or Samarkand. Take your pick. His past is a long, bloodied path, wrapped in silence. He eats less now, sleeps less too. But still he rides, across 1,000 miles again and again without asking why. Because he's not done. Back in the heart of the Mongol Empire, cities rise in his name. Streets are named after victories. Boys are taught stories half true, half terrifying. And yet Subutai has no estate, no monument. Just a tent, a few horses, and a satchel full of maps, creased at the edges from too much folding. You ride with him through another river valley. Another battle won days before. He says the more we win, the faster they forget why they lost. It hits you he's worried, not about enemies, about success. The empire is swelling now, bloated with gold titles, ambitions. Other generals strut in robes. Courtiers play at politics. There are rumors of new laws, tax codes, a census. And Subutai, he's drawing supply routes on oxhide with charcoal. No one asks him to. No one would dare stop him. You meet a young officer in a border garrison who doesn't recognize the name Subutai. He calls him the old rider. You almost say something. You don't, because Subutai wouldn't care. He once told you, if they remember my name, they'll plan for me. But if they forget, then I can ride again. And then he does. Another campaign, another front, a new terrain puzzle to solve. This time it's swampland. You hate it. Horses sink, bugs bite. Maps are useless. Subutai adapts. He studies the patterns of frogs, where they croak, how they jump. You laugh, he doesn't. He explains that frogs only avoid water if predators are nearby. So if the frogs go quiet, enemy scouts are close. He's right, again. He adjusts the army's movement by listening to frogs. Later he says the best generals read books, the better ones read land, but the best read life. You don't write that down. You don't need to. By now you notice a kind of rhythm to Subutai's thoughts. Not random, not divine, but layered. He never rides directly into battle. He never camps in the same spot twice. He never speaks of victory until a week has passed. And he always saves one arrow, unused, untouched, tucked into the same place on his saddlebag. When you ask him about it, he shrugs. Every battle leaves one thing undone. You're not sure if he means a task or a soul or a regret. You pass through a village that surrenders before you dismount. The elders greet you with salted milk and nervous hands. One of them kneels and presents a boy maybe 12, wiry, fierce-eyed. He wants to ride with the great general, the elder says. Subutai looks at the boy, then at you. What would you tell him, he asks. You think, then answer, you'll never stop moving, you'll never stop watching, you'll win too much, and lose things you don't remember losing. Subutai nods, says nothing else. The boy stays in the village. Later that night, by firelight, you finally ask what you've never dared. Do you regret it? Subutai doesn't answer at first. He pokes the fire, watches a spark spiral away. Then I regret that they'll build statues for kings who lost their wars and forget the man who ended empires with maps. You let that settle in the silence. He doesn't say it bitterly, just plainly, a fact. And you realize he never wanted glory. He wanted clarity. He wanted motion, precision, patterns. He was never trying to be remembered. He was trying to be understood. But the world is not kind to clarity. It prefers myth, noise, names. And Subutai, he was none of those things. He was a man with a worn saddle, a perfect map, and the patience to let an empire rot before he lifted a finger. You ride on. The grass sways behind you unbothered by all that has happened. 10,000 miles, 10,000 graves. And still the road bends forward. The wind feels different now. It doesn't whip across your cheeks like a blade or sting your eyes with frost. It glides cool, calm, and oddly gentle. You're far from the noise now, far from screaming battlefields and smoldering city gates. You're deep in the steppe again, riding alongside a man who has seen the edges of the known world and didn't blink. Subutai no longer speaks often, but when he does, it feels like a history book sighing open. You've just returned from another campaign one few remember. A sweep against Song resistance in the south. No massive clash, no legendary siege, just distance, terrain, timing, as always. And now you're watching him sketch something in the dirt outside his tent. It isn't a battlefield. It's a river system. Not for war, but for irrigation. You stare. Since when do you design water channels? He replies without looking up. Victory is a season. Soil is forever. You're not entirely sure if it's a proverb or a quiet confession. The truth is he's aging. You see it in the way he sits longer after riding. How his hands pause just a second longer when adjusting a saddle strap. There's a limp now, subtle but constant. But what never dims is his mind. One evening, a young officer visits his camp. Eager, excited, full of that fire you remember from your own early days. The officer bows and asks, how do you decide which flank to use? Which hill to hold? Subutai looks at him for a long moment, then gestures to the stars. When the wind blows one way and the wolves hunt another, that's when I move. The officer blinks. You hide your smile. It's not just mysticism. It's muscle memory. 1,000 instinctive decisions layered beneath centuries of observation. Subutai doesn't explain how he knows things. He just does. You think back to the old days when he was young, sharp-eyed, methodical. when every movement was a calculation, every retreat a step into something larger. Now he speaks less in terms of men and armies, more in rhythm cycles flows. He tells you empires breathe, then they choke, then they exhale ruin. You wonder what he sees when he looks at the Mongol Empire now bloated with land, splintered by politics ruled by successors who argue more than they conquer. He doesn't say it, but, he's concerned. Not for himself, for the machine he helped build. There's a story going around now told in markets and camps alike that Subutai once calculated the weight of enemy supplies by measuring their dust trails, that he could tell how many arrows were fired based on how many birds rose from a forest. You ask him about it. He just smirks. They only believe what they can't do. But even myths can't touch the depth of his actual work. You visit his storage yurt once. It's not full of treasures or trophies, it's full of records. Scrolls, maps, notes, weather charts, migration logs, copies of enemy languages, sketches of siege weapon failures, arrows from every major army he's ever faced labeled measured sorted. It's not a war room, it's a museum of understanding. And one corner holds a map unlike the others. A vast, nearly complete chart of everything, from the shores of China to the gates of Vienna. The rivers are precise. The roads are graded. The city's marked not just by location, but by response behavior. You recognize it for what it is. The mental map of a man who has walked across the world and remembered every stone. You step back, speechless. Subutai notices your awe and says almost apologetically, "There's still a sea I haven't seen." You realize that he's not proud of this map. He's frustrated that it's unfinished. He doesn't want a legacy. He wants completion. One final project arrives unexpectedly. A junior officer brings news there's unrest in the Far East, minor rebellions, logistical delays. The generals there want Subutai's guidance, not his army, his brain. He agrees. But he doesn't pack armor. He packs grain samples, weather notes, copies of battle rhythms, diagrams of water routes. When you ask him why, he says they've learned how to win. Now they need to learn how to wait. The journey east is slow, but Subutai uses every mile. He stops to mark sinking marshland, advises locals on seasonal grazing routes, and helps a village leader calculate grain storage against winter mold. Not a single sword is drawn. Yet somehow every region he passes grows quieter, calmer, more orderly, because now he's teaching rhythm. Not just to warriors, but to the land itself. Eventually he settles near a northern river. Not forever, but long enough to breathe. You visit him one last time. He's seated beside the water, feeding scraps to a one-eyed dog that refuses to leave his side. He doesn't rise when you approach, just nods, and says, "I used to count the enemy's tents. Now I count how long a river bends before it meets the sea." You sit beside him. There's no need to speak. You already know. He won the greatest campaigns in recorded history. Commanded more land than Alexander or Napoleon. Fought for emperors, rewrote warfare. And now he watches a river curve in silence. Because in the end, every general runs out of wars. But only Subutai ever understood how long the echo lasts. The sun hangs low on the horizon now, not quite setting, just hovering. You ride slowly through the flatlands of northern China, the wind brushing your cheeks like a breath from the past. You've been here before. Different campaign, different decade, same quiet fields. But Subutai's posture is a little more bent, a little more still. He's in his 70s now. His horse still obeys him with grace, but the speed is gone. His voice is softer. His fire still there, but banked like coals beneath ash. You're not here for war. You're here because the Song dynasty still resists. And because the empire still believes Subutai even now might be the one to end it. You're not so sure, not because he's lost the will, but because he's already mapped this terrain too many times. You've both crossed rivers that twist like ribbons, climbed hills dotted with watchtowers, march through rice paddies, their water reflecting sky like broken mirrors. He knows the names of towns that no longer exist. Villages rebuilt, renamed, reoccupied. And yet, it's different now. You're not hunting enemies anymore. You're hunting fatigue. The empire has stretched too far. The horses are thinner. The maps blur. Young commanders speak too loudly, too quickly. They call for assaults, for flames, for movement. Subutai listens, but doesn't act. He tells you this is a fight we can win, but not a war we need. He leads several sorties not into battle, but around it. Encirclements that never tighten. Raids that become escorts. At one mountain village, he protects a rice convoy meant for Song loyalists. His junior officers question him. His answer, hunger doesn't care who wins. That shuts them up. There's a rumor now that Subutai is going soft, that the great general who burned his way across Europe has lost his fire. You know better. He hasn't lost fire. He's just realized that the blaze is now behind him. His focus turns to logistics. You spend days with him counting how many oxen die per mile. He tests the absorption rate of dry soil, checking how long carts can be rolled before wheels must be reinforced. He draws supply web diagrams in the sand, arranging grains, water, hay, and time in overlapping spirals. No one else even understands them. He jokes, once I no longer lead armies, I lead rations. And yet those rations keep entire cities from starving. One morning you wake to find Subutai standing ankle-deep in a stream looking downstream toward a misty bend. What are you watching, you ask? He replies how far this water carries fallen leaves. You smile. He's still scouting, just differently now. Then comes the last campaign. Not planned, not grand, just necessary. A rebellion flares in the hills. Not by kings, just desperate farmers exhausted by levies, famine, fear. The young Mongol officers want a hard response. Crush it, they say. Burn the valley, make an example. Subutai says nothing. Instead, he rides alone to the village. You follow, of course. You always do. He sits beneath a tree and waits. No guards, no banners. Just him and that one-eyed dog still limping behind. Eventually, the villagers come. Axes, sticks, a few rusted swords. He looks at them unblinking. Old, weathered, but they know who he is. They lower their weapons. No battle, no speech, just an understanding. Later, he tells you they were never my enemy. Just in the way. That night, he gives his saddle to a boy with a limp. You help him walk back. Weeks pass. The rebellion fizzles. The capital sends no congratulations. There's no song, no drum. Only silence. And a growing ache behind Subutai's eyes. You notice he forgets things now. Not battles, not roads, but names. Yours sometimes. A day later, he remembers and apologizes. You tell him it's fine. You lie. But even as his memory begins to tangle, he still corrects maps. Still says things like that river bends wrong or that mountain shadow is too short for spring. Still notices footprints in the wrong direction. Still remembers the number of steps from tent flap to fire pit. But at night he sleeps longer. Deeper. You wake to find him snoring soft, low like wind in tall grass. Then one night he doesn't wake. Not immediately, not with a gasp, not with the sound. Just doesn't. You sit beside him as the sun rises. The one-eyed dog whines, curls into his side, and goes still. You whisper the names of every battle, every river, every tactic. Not because he can hear you, but because you can. You don't bury him with a sword or a banner. You bury him with his maps, folded, worn, annotated in a hand that will never write again. And in one pouch, the single arrow he never used, the one he always said was meant for what I leave unfinished. No one comes to claim his body, no procession, no funeral song. But months later in a city far away, a merchant tells a tale of an old man who once conquered the world with silence and speed, of a general who never needed statues because he left his name written in the paths armies still follow, of a man who counted rivers, not gold, and who once said victory is only noticed by those still standing when the dust settles. You are still standing, and the dust Hasn't. You ride alone now. The step hasn't changed. The wind still carries the same dry rhythm, brushing the grasses flat, curling dust along old caravan routes. But everything feels quieter. Not in the way of peace, in the way of absence. You've ridden this path before. 100 times, maybe more. But never without him. Every hoofbeat seems to echo longer than it should. You half expect to hear his voice gravelly amused sharp with some impossible observation like, that tree shouldn't be leaning in spring. But there's nothing. Only the sound of your own saddle creaking and the weight of everything he left behind. The empire breathes, it expands, but its breath is shallower now. Other generals ride, some talented, some ruthless, some even victorious. But none see the way he saw. None chart war as a living thing. You visit old battlegrounds. At Mohi the grass has grown back. A few scattered bones. A rusted helm cradled in the roots of a tree. A boy throws stones where the bridge once stood. He never knew Subutai, but he plays in a world shaped by him. At Liegnitz, farmers dig trenches for new wells, unaware they walk atop mass graves. You kneel, place your hand on the earth. It's cool, still, but not forgotten. Because even now, in the way roads are laid and how armies form and the way scouts measure their steps, he lives on. You reach the edge of a river valley where once he'd planned a crossing with nothing but 3 pebbles and a line of ants. The bridge is new, stone, broad, but you still see the old crossing in your mind. The logs, the shallow ford. His finger pointing left, always left. Because the wind curled that way that day. It's in these places that you begin to feel it. Subutai never built monuments. He became one. He lives in the fear that whispers before battle. In the pause before a charge. In the silence between horns. Even now, war scholars try to trace his brilliance. They chart his campaigns on maps, draw diagrams, debate over what he intended. But here's a secret, and they never will. He didn't predict. He listened. To hoofbeats, to rivers, to birdsong, to silence, and most of all to what wasn't there. Subutai's genius wasn't knowing what to do. It was knowing what others wouldn't, and in a world loud with ego and ambition that made him invisible and unstoppable, you reach his last camp. The bones of his fire pit still lie in the ground, half covered by moss. A rock he used as a stool remains beside it. You sit, and wait, and listen. The wind shifts. Somewhere behind you a hawk cries, and for just a moment you feel it again. That presence, that rhythm, that mind. He is not gone. He is in every curve of this road. He is in your silence, and in the silence of generals who learn to wait. A messenger arrives from the capital. A new campaign is stirring in the west. They want your advice. You mount your horse. As you ride, you whisper something only the wind hears. Show me the rhythm, because he taught you never to follow the map, but to read the land. The path is soft under your horse's hooves now. No more shouting officers. No more battered camps or war drums echoing off mountain walls. No more rustling of stolen maps at midnight or quiet calculations over firelight. There is only the hush of grass moving in waves, and the light, low, honey-colored washing everything in a sleepy warmth that makes the past feel even further away. And maybe it is. You ride past a river bend Subutai once charted. It still flows the same way years later. The stones in the current remember him, even if the men in cities do not. You reach a valley he refused to invade too costly, he said. Let them keep it. They'll bury themselves in it before long. They did. History has turned as he predicted. The Mongol Empire still sprawls across continents, but the seams are fraying. Too large, too quick, too heavy. Too many generals now drawing swords where they should be drawing arrows on parchment. And yet, his ideas still walk. You see it in how patrols move now, not in lines, but in spirals. You hear it in how young scouts speak echoing phrases they've never realized he invented. Never camp where your enemy expects you. A delayed army eats itself. A river only fights when misunderstood. They quote him without knowing. The old war journals misrecord dates. Some forget names. Others credit as victories to emperors who never stepped onto a battlefield. But it doesn't matter. Because while other men shaped history through power and speeches, Subutai sculpted silence. He built victory with distance and timing and letting the other side believe they had already won. Even now historians argue. Was he better than Hannibal, Alexander, Rommel, Napoleon? But they missed the point. Subutai didn't want to be compared. He wanted to disappear into the results. And so he did. When he died quietly in his tent with no banners raised, there were no statues, no tomb, no lineage. Only a patch of earth where grass grew long because no one dared tread there. Yet if you listen closely, you'll hear what he left behind. The echoes of a hoofbeat that never slowed. The whisper of a strategy drawn on the wind. And the rhythm of a world that still unknowingly moves around his memory. You ride past one final hill. The sun is setting behind it long and low. And on the slope a single figure stands. It isn't really there, just memory, shadow, imprint. He doesn't speak. He only looks at you. Then turns slow calm and rides off into that red-gold horizon. You don't follow. You don't need to. Because you've already learned how to ride in his absence. And that is the mark of his greatness. Not that he commanded millions. Not that he crossed continents. But that he taught one rider to see the wind, to count the silence, to wait, and win. Now the horses are still. The maps are folded. And the fires of 1,000 forgotten camps flicker only in your memory. There is no sound but the low hum of the steppe. The breeze threading softly through tall grass, and the faint creak of a distant saddle you'll never hear again. The kind of quiet that carries not sadness but reverence. The calm that follows the thunder of a lifetime's worth of motion. Let your body settle now, every muscle heavy, your breath slow and even. Feel the weight of the journey fall away across deserts and rivers, battles and briefings, glory and dust. You were there for all of it. Not just watching, but walking beside the most elusive, most brilliant figure in military history. And now the story rests. So can you. Let your thoughts drift not toward endings, but to open grasslands stretching into forever. Places without walls. Nights without fear. A silence so complete it holds the wisdom of 10,000 victories. Tomorrow will bring another story, another road, another echo. But for now, sleep, traveler, you've marched enough. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.